I was inspired to post this, probably my third odd experience, after reading a post here that reminded me of it. It happened probably when I was about 5, I want to say. It was before my family moved states and we lived in a 2-story house in New England. I'd say our house was at least 100 years old. That doesn't exactly explain the phenomenon I witnessed, but maybe it had been a site of another house at one time. I'm not sure. A little backstory, I was a pretty sensitive kid, and very in tune, especially around this age. My mom told me she'd often be thinking of something like, I want to make chicken for dinner, and then I'd ask her if we could have chicken for dinner. That sort of funny thing. It seems dumb and silly, but I also think it's a bit telling. Our laundry units were in the basement of this house. My mom never liked going down there much because it was wet and pretty dark. It also smelled like earth. One day she was carrying me down with her to put a load of laundry in the machine. I asked her, and I remember this pretty clearly, who those people in the corner were. She freaked out and asked what I was talking about. I remember I saw 2 people there, sort of see-through and sort of floating above the ground in the upper corner. One was an adult woman, one was a young boy. They both had buckles on their shoes, I told my mother. Note that I was too young to know about pilgrims or old-fashioned clothing at this age. I didn't learn history in school yet at all. They were wearing odd clothes, too. I told my mom. The mom looked angry, but the boy says it's okay. And I remember that. The apparition of the woman did look very unhappy, and it scared me, but her son spoke to me and told me that it was okay. Anyway, after relaying all this to my mom, she freaked out and we went upstairs fast. I'm not sure what it was. Like I said, I wasn't learning about history at this young age. I didn't watch much TV either because I went to an alternative school. I was also kind of put off by old things and scared of them. We lived in a very historically rich town and neighborhood for the War of Independence. My wife has an obsession with collecting old things, like vases, clocks, paintings, and basically anything that looks like it's from the Victorian era. In my opinion, it feels more like simplistic hoarding, but I also want to keep her happy, so I don't really ever bother her about what she buys. Most of the time, it's innocent stuff that looks like replicas, but there have been a few times where she's had some decent scores at estate sales. The only score I ever had was one that I was initially proud of. Unfortunately, it came when my uncle passed away. He was an older man. My mom and he were 15 years apart in age, so she was 55 when he passed away at 70, back in 2018. It's not super important, but I felt the need to explain why my uncle would have died naturally when I was only 30 years old. When he died, my mom called me, and I went over to his house to spend some time with my cousins. My wife didn't come because she had to work, which was fine. I told her it was just going to be a small get-together, and then it wasn't worth taking the day off for. My mom and I got there, had a nice dinner in his honor. At the end of dinner, when we were all just sitting around and talking, my oldest cousin told me that I could take whatever I wanted from this house. They were intending to sell most of it before they just got rid of the house in the end. As soon as she told me this, I knew exactly what I wanted. My uncle's old grandfather clock. It was a nice wooden clock that he loved dearly, and I thought it would be a neat item to both have in his memory and score some points with the wife, since it was something she totally would have bought. We loaded it into my truck, got it covered, and got it home. I had the neighbor help me get it in, and he kept remarking how nice it was the whole time. So I was convinced that I had done a good thing by taking it. When the wife got home, I took her into the dining room and showed her the clock. Her reaction was the exact opposite of what I wanted. She looked at me and told me that we couldn't keep it. I was heartbroken at first, so I asked her why we would have to get rid of it. She looked me dead in the eyes and said that it had a bad energy about it, and that she didn't feel like my uncle wanted us to have it. I flatly told her that my uncle was dead, and that I didn't mean to disrespect him at all, but he had no need for it, and my cousin said I could take it. She was insistent that we needed to give it back. It was a small argument, really, but in the end, I basically told her that it was mine now, and that we were going to keep it. So now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about why I should have listened to her in the first place and just given it back. The first event that occurred happened on the first night we had it. We were sitting in the living room and eating. I know what's the purpose of a dining room if you're going to eat in the living room. When the lights in the dining room randomly kicked on. Initially, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe I had left them on, despite being fairly certain that I hadn't. I turned them off and went to leave the room. As I walked out, they immediately kicked back on. I was a bit shocked at first, but kind of just let it go. So I turned them off and just went back to the living room. What seemed like as soon as I sat down, there was a loud popping noise that came from the dining room. I got up again to check and found that the bulb in the light fixture had completely blown, like the glass shattered inside the housing level of blown. This was the first event, and probably should have meant more to me than it did. But I moved on, and hindsight is 20/20. The next event happened randomly around a week or so later. We were in bed, and out of nowhere, that damned thing started chiming super loud. It rang 7 times, and then stopped. I jumped up and went down into the room with the clock, and the pendulum wasn't even swinging. I was seriously confused at this point, as the chimes shouldn't have gone off without having wound the clock, but here it was, middle of the night, and it was definitely going off. The third event was the last one, for reasons that will become obvious here soon. So after the whole chiming in the middle of the night, I decided to ask my wife what she meant when she said it had a bad energy. She told me that something about the clock was just dark, and that it was telling her we weren't meant to have it. I told her that I would think about either giving it back to my cousin or donating it to Goodwill. That night we decided to go out and eat and just have a good night together. When we were driving out to the restaurant, my cousin called me and just wanted to check in on us. We were talking, and my wife asked her about the clock, kind of just blindsiding her with an "I think the clock is haunted, did your dad ever tell you anything about it?" Much to my surprise, my cousin then told me that the clock actually originally belonged to my great-uncle, my uncle's father, and that my uncle took it when he passed away because he was strangely drawn to it. Apparently, my great-uncle was an aggressive drunk that was actually physically abusive to his son, her father. She said that when he died, my uncle basically gave everything of his away and then threw away what he couldn't sell. But for some reason, he just would not let go of the clock. She told us that my uncle never really liked the clock much, which was a complete 180 from what I was thinking, and that she had always thought there was something creepy about it for some reason. So at this point, I'm realizing that I'm in possession of a clock that was most likely haunted by my great-uncle's very angry spirit, and I right then and there made the decision to get rid of it. We ate, had a decent night. When we got home, I entered and saw what looked like a pile of glass in the living room. I stepped in and flicked the light on, only to see that the clock had been knocked down and to the side. The glass in the front door was completely shattered, and the face of the clock itself was destroyed, and the door that blocked the pendulums was basically off its hinges. This clock was heavy as hell, but yet it had somehow managed to tip over and completely destroy itself. Well, I say that, but I think we can all assume what probably actually happened. So I cleaned up the glass and took the whole thing apart, removing each and every screw, until the overall clock was just wood and some metal scrap. The next day, I took the wood of the clock out back, and I burned it. I gave the metal to my neighbor who does a bunch of metal recycling and art sculpting and whatnot, and I never looked back. I may have honestly loved that clock and thought it was really neat, but it wasn't worth being haunted by an angry dead relative. I'm fairly new to posting on Reddit, and came across this subreddit and thought a little history on the farm I live on would interest most people here. So please bear with me as I find you will relate to why I'm so freaked out and not too crazy about the fact that I will be inheriting this piece of land. First off, let me take you back to the early 1900s when an outbreak of typhoid fever struck a family that lived on the land we now own. They were a mother and a father to a young baby. Also living on this land was an old farmer. This so-called man had found out about the family's sickness and had locked them in a wooden corn crate due to how contagious and detrimental typhoid fever was. He left them to succumb to death by starvation. I can't even fathom the torture this was for them. Their bodies were then buried about a quarter of a mile from my house, right under an apple tree. There are still 3 large stones placed underneath it. Now we can get to the mysterious lady in a white nightdress that still roams the land. Her first sighting had been in around the 1930s. My great-grandmother lived down the road from where I now live. She had lived there before cement roads replaced dirt ones, and outhouses were the only means of a restroom. She had family staying with her for the week, and then one morning one of the family members had looked out the window and watched as a young woman in a white nightgown slowly walked up her yard and went into the nearby shed. This was strange because no one had lived within walking distance, and why would they be going into the shed? They had then decided to go see what this mysterious woman was up to. As they entered, there was no sign of anyone. It was as if she walked in and just disappeared within the minute it took them to get inside. Now this is where it gets better. The most recent sighting of her was in the late 1990s. My uncle had been hunting around the same area of this unfortunate family's burial site. As he was trekking through the woods, a woman in white approached him, asking him for a dance. He had laughed and said, "I'm sorry, but I've really got to go," because he was so taken aback by this wandering woman just gallivanting through our woods. As he walked away from her, he turned back and she was gone into thin air once again. I personally have never encountered anything with this woman, but it is rumored that it's the deceased mother. But I also have had my fair share of experiences separate from this subject. I could keep you here all day reading some of the stories I have about things that have happened on this land. If you took the time to read this, then thank you. I hope you enjoyed and would like to hear some of your personal stories as well. OP did have a comment that I would like to add to this. The most crazy thing I myself ever experienced was one night I was outside feeding our animals. I looked into the woods, and there were old oil lamp lanterns, just the glow of their flame, floating out past our fencing in the field. There were probably 10 at least. Let me tell you, I dropped my flashlight and booked it out of there faster than I ever thought I could run. Another instance was when my grandmother was hanging clothes out on her line before I existed. She heard an old classical song coming from the edge of the woods, also by this same fence line. She explained that it had ran down almost as if it were on a track, and the sound dissipated as if a train was going by. Something she could never really explain. This was in the middle of the woods. How in the world would classical music be playing, especially in thin air, in the 1970s? One night, I was on my way home from a particularly hard day at work. I spaced out as I drive a familiar route. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that there was a shadow. At first, I didn't think much of it. However, the shadow never seemed to vanish. So I looked over to the passenger side of my SUV, and this shadow appeared to be running along the fence beside my car. The more I acknowledged it, the more prominent it became. I had an overwhelming sense of dread, like this thing was after me, and if I didn't get away, I was in some real trouble. So I hit the gas, trying to outrun it, but it kept pace with my SUV. However, just as I was sure that I wasn't going to get away, a tractor-trailer drove past and its headlights hit the shadow person, and it vanished like it couldn't survive in the light. I was on the phone with my friend, and I truly believe that I encountered a shadow person that night. I drove home as fast as I could, feeling that hell itself was right behind me. The next one is a little more intense, and all take place on the same day. Me and my older sister went to Gettysburg, PA, and made a day of walking the battlefield. As the sun went down, we went to do a ghost tour. It started off in the basement of an old bed and breakfast that has many different spirits. When we entered the basement, a table sat in front of the room, with a variety of toys on it. As the tour guide told us the history of the old B&B and the events that had transpired during the Civil War, my sister screamed that something had pulled her hair. The tour guide laughed and said that it's just the little boy that died here. He likes teachers and caregivers. My sister nervously laughed and said, well, lucky me. As the guide finished the story and we were exiting, they stopped me and my sister and asked my sister to check her pockets. In her jacket pocket, there was a red toy car that I clocked as we entered the basement at the beginning of the night that sat on the table. Now, it was in my sister's pocket. But that's not the creepiest thing that happened to us on that night. Now, the first half of the story, the spirits focused on my sister. This time it was my turn, and unfortunately the spirit I encountered was no child. As our guide walked us across the battlefield, we stood at the edge of some woods. There was a sign that said, "Do not enter." I asked why we could not walk down the path. Our guide told us there is a Confederate soldier that haunted this path, and if you encroach on its territory, the spirit gets upset. However, that was an understatement. I asked if I could walk the path, and the guide said you can, but it's a bad idea. Me, being brash and in my late teens, said, well, ghosts can't hurt me, and what do I care if I upset him? The second I crossed into the soldier's territory, I had a bad feeling like every fiber of my being was telling me to get the hell out of there. But I ignored it and pushed on. As I got further, I heard my guide yell, "Do not cross the fallen tree." Yeah, right, I thought, as I continued. About 100 yards in, I came across the tree. I put my foot on it to step over it, and as if on cue, my body froze, refusing to go any further. The wind stopped, and all sounds of nature stopped. I heard a sound of a horse walking, and then its neigh. Looking around, I saw no horse. It stopped in front of me, I would say around 25 to 30 feet away. I heard a loud packing sound, and then a click. Next thing you know, I saw a flash of light and a loud bang, feeling something whiz by my face. I turned around and ran out of the woods, noping the hell out of there as fast as my legs could carry me. Getting out of the woods, I felt safe asking the guide what the hell actually just happened. She said that's how the soldier says hi, by shooting at intruders. So my next set of stories takes place at my house. So many strange things have happened there. I will start with the little things first and work my way up to the creepier stuff. Well, inside of my house dwells the spirit of a little old lady, and she's been here ever since I was a child. While she's not an angry spirit, sometimes she does get a little rowdy. For example, at night when it's just me in the house, I can hear her standing outside of my door and talking. If I ask her to go away, she will leave me in peace. As a child, I actually slept in the room where she passed away, and I slept in it all of my childhood. While I didn't have any spooky things happen there, I felt that in its own right bore mentioning. This may be why the spirit is more active around me. My mom had always been a skeptic, and still was all the way up to her last days. But one day, our personal Casper, the old lady, wanted to make herself known. So while me, my sister, and mom sat talking in my little sister's room, the bathtub turned on full blast, the toilet flushed, and then the sink turned on. Another event that was more annoying than scary, to me at least, I was sitting downstairs watching TV, the remote being on the other side of the room. The next thing I know, the TV channel starts to change. It stops on the news, and I ask the spirit of the old lady to please stop and put back on my show. The TV goes back to the channel I was watching. Out of reflex, I say thank you, and I hear a whisper that says, "You're welcome." Now, these last two stories take place outside of my house. The first being after I got home from a hard day at work. I looked over and saw two full-bodied apparitions. I could not make out the exact attire they were wearing, but I can tell you that they were old-school military uniforms. I looked away after I noticed them, and when I looked back, they were not there anymore. The last one honestly freaked me out. It's short, but still creepy. I walked out to my car to get something, and at this point I can't remember what anymore. But as I walked up to the passenger side of my car, I grabbed my item and shut the door. When I stood up, I hear an apparition right behind me growl, "Dustin." I took off like a bat out of hell. When I looked back, I saw a dark shadow standing by my car, and it vanished as soon as I caught a glimpse of it. And a bonus story. I recently had a nightmare where a woman stood on all fours at the foot of my bed. I grabbed the nearest sharp object, which for some reason was a pencil, and I stabbed her in the head. She didn't bleed, which to me was the scariest thing, because I work under the "if it bleeds, it can be killed" philosophy. I woke up, and I was unable to move. And until I was able to move again, I could feel the overwhelming presence just out of sight. I was so scared that I used my sheer force of will to break the paralysis. Once I was able to move again, I no longer felt the presence or the malice of this creature. I'm currently 14 years old, and these encounters all started around 12 months ago. If you know how to deal with this, please do help. My first experience, my family and I, mom, stepdad, younger sister, went to a haunted prison. As the tour began, we walked through corridors and old buildings. I kept on getting an eerie feeling, so I shined my light towards the end of the corridor. I quickly saw a tall, shadowy man run across the corridor. A few scary seconds later, I saw a tall, white, shadowy man do the exact same thing. I didn't tell anyone, as no one would believe me. Second, I was in my bathroom brushing my hair as a bunch, 30 to 50, small orange balls, I assume orbs, floated around me. I didn't freak out, I just kind of looked at them and felt calm. And this was about a month after the prison experience. Third, very frightening, my sister and I were visiting my dad for Christmas. We booked a hotel. It was a golf hotel and it had vineyards. Anyway, my younger sister wanted to go find rabbits at around 11 p.m. So we grabbed torches and went toward the vineyards. In the middle of the vineyards, there was a fountain with paths all around it. I stupidly said, looks like a ritual has been done here. At that moment, I got a really bad feeling, like the one at the prison. I shined my torch at a random path, and a girl, maybe 500 meters away, was just sitting there. Her hair was black and her dress was dark. I shrugged it off at first, and we kept walking around. I got the feeling about a minute later, and I turned around and she was chasing us. She had a white face, and it was terrifying. I grabbed my sister and I pushed her in front of me as we ran away. This was the most frightening thing ever, but no one believed us. Fourth, and this happened about an hour ago, I was showering and about 10 to 20 small white orbs appeared. I shrugged it off as I'm okay with them and they seemed friendly. I've had other experiences. For example, I've said I like this song and the speakers instantly turned up without anyone touching them. Or the time when the power went out and a shadow person appeared in front of me. I don't really know if all this is paranormal or if I'm just weird. I would like to get to know whatever is out there, as long as it's nice and friendly. Hey there, friends. I hope you guys enjoyed this collection of terrifying paranormal stories. A huge thank you to the Redditors that let me read their stories, and to PA Nightmare for submitting story number 4. Greatly appreciate it. If you have a story you would like to submit to my channel, there is a link down in the description where you can actually submit it directly to me, and I can feature it on my channel if, you want to. It's up to you. If you enjoyed this video and would like more content like this, or content that is so vastly different it's like comparing t-shirts to waffle irons, please consider joining the Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button and the bell icon next to it, and you become part of the Nevermore. You can do things to help support the growth of the Nevermore, such as following me on Twitter, liking me on Facebook, joining my subreddit, or supporting me through Patreon or Ko-fi. All of them optional, and every single one of them more appreciated than you will ever know. Also, if you know someone who would enjoy this video, please consider sharing it with them. I would love them to see my stuff, and, that helps a lot too. Alright, friends, I hope you have a fantastic day and a fantastic night, and I will see you all in the next video, but until then, have a great Wednesday, and a great Thursday too, because that's tomorrow. And yeah, that's about all. So, talk to you later. Sleep well.